Awesome. Well, I think we will start rolling to give Gabe plenty of time because I know he has a lot to cover. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. My name is Heather Levy, and I'm the Conservation Program Manager with Birds Georgia. If you're new to our organization, our mission is building places where people and birds thrive, and we do this through boots on the ground conservation work, education, and community engagement. We have events and programs going on statewide throughout the year, so please check out our website if you're interested in getting involved or attending any of our events. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent out to everybody who registered. It will also be posted onto our YouTube channel to make it even easier to share. As Gabe is presenting, please feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A, and at the end of his presentation, we'll address those questions with any leftover time that we have. And with that, I'm really pleased to introduce my colleague, Gabe Andrle, Birds Georgia's Habitat Program Manager. He oversees habitat restoration and management efforts across the state. This includes a variety of habitats from Piedmont riparian forests and woodlands to maritime grasslands on Jekyll Island. This work involves a wide array of partners from Georgia Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to local land trusts and private landowners. Gabe stepped into this role in 2020, previously serving as a conservation program coordinator, where he managed the Wildlife Sanctuary Program and Plants for Birds initiative, which involved connecting gardeners to native plants and finding ways to better their spaces for wildlife. Gabe graduated from Emory University with a degree in environmental sciences and has a background in habitat management and restoration, ecology, invasive species management, native planting, and environmental education. And with that, Gabe, I will let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Heather. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared and pull up my presentation, and we'll be able to rock and roll from there. Let's get this. Alrighty. Cool. Well, I'm really excited to be speaking with you all today about something that I really enjoy, really love talking about, and a huge part of what I do with Birds Georgia. So yeah, we're going to be talking about recognizing and working with natural ecological communities for habitat restoration. To give everyone an overview of what I'm going to be covering today, first I'm going to talk a little bit about Birds Georgia's habitat program, how it came to be, and kind of how we go about our work. And then we're going to go over what a natural community is. And then we're going to talk about recognizing natural communities and how we can apply what we know about natural communities to habitat work. And then we're going to go through some examples of work that Birds Georgia is doing and how we are recognizing and looking at communities around us to shape and inform our work. And lastly, we'll cover some resources and learning opportunities that I think are appropriate for folks. All right, so the first thing we have to do is think about why we do the work that we do. And unfortunately, birds are not doing well, and that drives a lot of the work that we do, especially here at Birds Georgia and our conservation team. And there were some reports and studies that were published uh, within the past 5-10 years that really documented this decline well. In 2019, there was a study that found 1 in 4 birds have disappeared from America, North America, in the past 50 years. And so that's a net population loss of about 3 billion birds. And Audubon published some findings recognizing 2/3 of North American birds at risk of extinction from global temperature rise. And you can see some of the different groups of birds that are declining, from aerial insectivores to eastern forest birds. And that 2019 study about the decline of North American birds found 2 main drivers that were causing losses and declines in the net population of birds. And those 2 main causes were habitat loss and habitat degradation.
Hey, Gabe, your slide has not advanced from your title slide.
Oh no. Um, all right. What shall I do? Let's,
Maybe, yeah, stop sharing and reshare.
yeah.
It was working fine earlier. Okay, I just saw your
Oh,
outline go.
sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
Um, okay, you can see the outline,
Loading. Yes.
and let's see if I advance it. Can you see this slide?
No.
All right. Well, that's okay. We're, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So it's just really slow. Well, bear with me. If it gets really bad, let me know.
Okay.
But yeah, here you can see the outline of these two reports that I was referencing, and and here circled in red, we can see the two leading causes that were found in this 2019 study. So not only through this study did we find that we're losing habitat, but the habitat that we have is decreasing in its ability to support birds and other wildlife. Um, and so that's, a massive issue. But one silver lining with this is that um, um, there were there's evidence of some increases in bird populations, woodpeckers, raptors, waterfowl, and all of those increases can be linked in some ways to direct conservation actions that have taken place over the past 50 years. And so that gives us hope that there's hope, there's things that we can do to combat these issues. And so all of this led to us creating the habitat program at Birds, Georgia. So we went statewide. We used to be just focused in Atlanta, and we went statewide in 2020, and shortly after started the habitat program in order to address the declines that we're seeing in birds through habitat issues. And so we established the habitat program, and I was the first piece to the puzzle that shaped the habitat program. And since 2021, we've expanded. We have 3 full-time staff that work in the habitat program, and we contract out other support when needed for various habitat projects that we're working on. And we rely heavily on volunteers. So thank you to any of you who have come out and volunteered with us. And if you haven't, I would welcome you to come do so. And so when we created this habitat program, we wanted to think about what are our goals, what's going to drive the habitat program at Birds, Georgia. And obviously with conservation goals being in the bird or in the conservation department. But one thing we thought about right away is, are we going to focus on specific birds, or how are we going to do this? And we ended up concluding that we really wanted to focus on habitat first, and focus on habitats that birds need, so we can have a really holistic approach to supporting the natural communities, the ecosystems that our birds rely on. And and so at times we're looking at specific birds, but a lot of our work in the habitat program is driven by specific habitat types and partnerships. And so we do have some priority areas and habitats that we've identified. Specifically, we do a lot of work in the South River watershed, the Chattahoochee River watershed coming out of Atlanta. We do a lot of work in the lower coast, and we also focus on riparian corridors and grasslands. And those habitats in particular have seen birds that use them declining quite rapidly. So you can see the graphics in the bottom of the screen show that migratory birds and grassland birds have been facing some serious declines, especially grassland birds. And so if we can support those habitat types, then we can support those birds. And so that's kind of how we've approached a lot of our work. And a big thing is that we don't own any land. So we rely on partnerships to have an impact when it comes to our habitat program. And so we work with a variety of partners that have similar visions to us, similar values, and want to focus on long-term impact with habitat work. And that, those partners include a lot of different organizations, from Trust for Public Land, Jekyll Island Authority, Department of Natural Resources, National Park Service, and the list goes on. And early on, we also recognized that we wanted to engage with the people that were working with plants. in the state and get to know them and start to partner with them and work with them. Because obviously we are coming at it from a bird angle, but we recognize that habitats are shaped by the plants that are in those habitats, and the majority of the work that the habitat program does is with plants to support the birds and the ecosystems that use them. So the last thing is with our habitat program, we kind of have a unique approach where we have education and engagement and volunteer opportunities. So those are the other two branches of our organization, the education team and community engagement team. And so when possible, we try to align our habitat work with programming in order to allow our habitat program to have a bigger impact, to allow us to tell the stories and highlight, the work that's being done, connect the community to that work. And I think that's really allowed us to have a bigger impact and make our habitat work not only meaningful for the birds and the insects, but also for the people that live and exist in those spaces as well. All right, so now I want to start to think about natural communities. And and to do that, we have to take a step back and look at the state as a whole and talk about ecoregions in the state. And so many of you are probably familiar with Georgia's ecoregions, and they can be divided up in various ways. The map that you see on the screen right now has them split up within the northwest. You have the Ridge and Valley and the Cumberland Plateau. Usually they're split up. In this map, they're together. Then you have the Blue Ridge in the northeast. You have the Piedmont, where Atlanta is. You have the large coastal plain, which is sometimes split up into two different areas, the lower and the upper. And then there's also the coast or the maritime region. And these are large regions are largely shaped by their unique geology. And because we have multiple ecoregions in the state, we really have the kind of underminings of some really great diversity when it comes to plants and animals and natural communities. So on the right of this slide, you can see a cove forest up in the Blue Ridge. And on the left, all the way down on the coast, there's a maritime grassland. Um, and so we have a great array of different habitats driven by the different ecoregions that we have. And so recognizing and learning those ecoregions is really important to start to understand what shapes those ecoregions, and that's our natural communities. Now, with the diversity of ecoregions that we have an incredible diversity of bird life. And there's more than 440 species of birds that have been documented in Georgia, from the long-billed curlew over there on the right that hangs out on the coast to the southern breeding range of a lot of northern species up in the Blue Ridge, like the Canada warbler right there in the middle, and also things that are pretty widespread, like the summer tanager on the left. And so because we have this variety of habitats, we have a lot of great bird life to think about and to prioritize and protect. Now I want to get into what exactly a natural community is, and the definition that's given in the Natural Communities of Georgia, the book that's seen here, and is an incredible resource, and I'd highly recommend people check out. It's a book that it was put together by some legends when it comes to conservation in Georgia, and it is an incredible reference for what I'm going to be talking about today. And yeah, so the way that book defines a natural community is a natural community is an assemblage of native plant and animal species considered together with the physical environment and associated ecological processes, which usually recurs on the landscape. So looking at this slide, you guys can enter in the chat if you want and guess what natural community do you think this is? Does anybody have any guesses? We have some pretty cool species on the slide. We have smooth earth snake up in the top right. We have sunflower Helianthus porteri, the yellow flower on the top of the screen. We have wavy-lined heterocampa moth caterpillar. We've got some coral fire dot lichen. You can obviously see there's some exposed rock. There's some pines, there's moss, lichen, there's all sorts of stuff. Um, and so looking at that, and also this bird list from when I went birding at this location a couple months ago, you see some particular bird species. And all of those things help shape the community that we see here, which is Stone Mountain's granite outcrop community. So it's a granite outcrop community, and in particular, this is at Stone Mountain. And there's a lot of different things that we want to consider and think about when we are seeking to understand natural communities and considering them and their implications for the work that we do on the landscape. So they are, first of all, more specific than the ecoregions that I just outlined. There's more natural communities within the various ecoregions, and they can overlap a bit too, and so they can be quite complex. Um, so some of the considerations to think about: the plant and animal communities that are present. So I highlighted some of the species that are at the Stone Mountain granite rock outcrop. The physical environment, the geology, the topography. Are you the site that you're on, is it have a lot of northern exposure, eastern, southern, western? What's the hydrology like? Where are you in relation to the water table? What are the soils like? Do you have sandy, loamy, clay, silt? Environmental factors are also important in shaping natural communities. The temperature, which affects the growing season length, frost dates, moisture, rainfall, humidity, nutrients in the soil, and then disturbance also plays a massive role on shaping these natural communities. And so, yeah, natural communities are, like I said, a little more specific than ecoregions, but they are more holistic than, say, a plant community. Plant community or animal community help shape and define natural communities that we see around us. And so, to simplify it even more, I want to start really broadly, and in order to help folks begin to recognize natural communities around them, we can split them up into three main terrestrial natural community types, those being forest, woodland, and grassland.
Gabe, your slide is still on the Natural Communities of Georgia book.
There we go. We're good?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, so starting broadly to begin to recognize these natural communities, we've got forest, woodland, and grassland. And these three all change across ecoregions. So if you are in the Blue Ridge, a forest is going to look different than if you were in the lower coastal plain. And they also vary depending on where you are on a specific site. So if you are in the Blue Ridge, your forest could vary depending on if you are on a north-facing slope or an east-facing slope. And so all of these things need to be taken into consideration, but starting by just identifying if you're in a forest, a woodland, or a grassland can be really beneficial. And it's important to note that there's more than one of each type. So with grasslands, there's also savannas, canebrakes, glades, and using all the other considerations that I mentioned in the last slide are kind of how you can start to define those specific types of grasslands, woodlands, or forests. And then there are some natural communities that are difficult to define and don't necessarily fit those three categories, but those aren't as abundant, but those would be things like rock outcrops or spray cliffs up in the Blue Ridge. One thing that can be beneficial is looking for specialist species. Looking for specialist species that stand out and help define those natural communities can help you clue in on the fact that you're in a certain natural community. And so one thing that you can try to remember and think about to help you recognize basic natural communities, just go around and ask the birds if you need sunscreen. So we'll start over in the the left side of the screen here. And so we're walking out there. That's Spruill Bluff in west central Georgia. We're kind of up on a elevated area, and we see a bird fly in, and that's our indigo bunting friend saying fire, fire, where, here, here. And so we see this bird, and in particular, we're asking birds that we don't see everywhere. So not super widespread birds, in terms of they're not in a bunch of different ecosystems or habitat types, but ones that are, usually just found. Like, I only see this bird out at Spruill Bluff. So what does it say about Spruill Bluff? Well, you ask that bird, hey, do I need sunscreen? And the indigo bunting's like, yes, you definitely need some sunscreen. So you can guess that you are in a grassland. There we are. So this is just highlighting the fact that can be really beneficial to think about the sunlight that is present, because the sunlight is going to help define some of these natural communities. And so if we look to the middle of the screen, we have another natural community, and you see there's some grass in there, there's some pines, there's some oak trees as well. It's not as open as the previous location, and this is at Chattahoochee Bend State Park, which is in the Piedmont, kind of southwest of Atlanta. And here we come across a bird, and that is a summer tanager, and it's up there in the tree saying "chicky tucky tuck." And so we asked the summer tanager, "Hey, do I need sunscreen?" And the summer tanager was like, maybe." And if it's a maybe, then you're probably in a woodland. So woodlands have, it's an in-between. It has some sunny areas, some shady areas. There's enough sun to generate grass growth in the understory, and a lot of kind of herbaceous stuff, especially if it's well managed. Um, and then if we look to the right of our screen, we have something that is a bit more shaded. And so we're looking around and we hear chipper, chipper. We've got a scarlet tanager. So we ask the scarlet tanager, hey, do I need sunscreen? And it says, probably not. So thinking about specialist birds and asking them, or just looking up and seeing if you need sunscreen, can help us figure out what kind of natural community we might be in. Um, all right. So now I kind of want to get into what you can do to start to further define your natural community. You're going out, you're asking the birds, do I need sunscreen or not? You're figuring out if it's a woodland, a grassland, or a forest. But to go about further figuring that out, or figuring out if there are some communities that maybe need some help or need some extra management and have changed over time, we got to get curious. We got to start documenting things and trying to do research when possible. All of this you can do on various scales. You could do it in your backyard. You could do it, for large habitat management projects. And Birds Georgia likes to go out and start by making observations. Our habitat team goes out and we keep a work log, a field log of what we're seeing. We also use iNaturalist and tend to make iNaturalist projects for a lot of our sites. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, it's a great community science platform, a website, and an app that allows you to document any living thing. And so we have projects at a lot of our work sites where we can see not only what we're observing, but what other people are observing in our project sites. And we actually we hosted some bio blitzes where we get a bunch of people, like you can see in the bottom of the screen, out to a site. And everybody gets out iNaturalist, and we go around and look for different flora and fauna and of stuff, and just make observations and get to know the field, get to know the site, and start to look for patterns in what we're seeing, and try to hopefully use that to help us define what natural communities are present. Also think about doing things like plant surveys. We started doing autonomous recording units. Those are for recording birds. We set up this unit out in the field, and we can leave it for a couple weeks, and it's taking in sound recordings, and then we can analyze that later to see what birds are using a site. Establishing photo points, doing drone flights. There's all sorts of ways of starting to document a site and get some baseline data so that you have that to compare over time. Another thing that's really important is to reflect on the disturbance regime that either is present, was present, um, or might be in the future. And so that's fire, wind, and water and how it affects our natural communities and spaces around us. So fire historically was a huge part of Georgia's natural communities and ecosystems. Most of Georgia experienced fire on some interval, and so thinking about where you are and what fire might have looked like on the landscape currently or in the past. Um, Wind storms can have huge impacts. Water, does the site flood? Once again, where's the water table? What does that look like? And the other thing that's really critical here and kind of throws all of this off and can make things difficult, but in my opinion makes things really interesting, is the human component. So our natural community is really natural. And we have to think of everything within a human context, and this is really critical when you are going and looking at a new site and thinking about what's the history of the site, what was it used for, what is the community, how does the community use the space, how do they interact with it, what are the management practices that have historically been used on a site. You can look at things like historic aerial photos online to look back several decades to see what the land looked like previously. Obviously talking to folks that are working in that space, talking to the community can be really helpful. Looking for historical surveys or management plans. And then also looking when you're at a site, looking for areas that have little human impact can also provide some clues. So areas that maybe don't get as much traffic, don't get managed as much, look and see what nature is doing in those places to look for clues of what does this space kind of want to do, what's it going to do naturally. And the idea of let it grow, don't mow is kind of that principle. And it's something that like you can kind of apply to your own green space, even if you have a small yard. My backyard here in Atlanta metro area, I just let it grow and saw what was coming up, saw a bunch of non-native turf grasses, but also saw things like elephant's foot, broom sedge, poverty oak grass, different hypericum species. And so those things are giving me little bits of information, clues about the plant community that's helping define the natural community that my is a part of. And that can help us inform maybe the management and how I restore my yard if I want to do that, or how I can improve it for wildlife. And it's important to remember every site is unique. Each site has its own version of a natural community, and they blend together. This is really critical, and why it's important to kind of think broadly, but also try to get as detailed as possible at times, and know that everything's different. And that's part of what makes this work really exciting and interesting. Um, all right. Okay. So, what does understanding natural communities, how does it help us with habitat work? Now that we kind of know how to recognize a community, how can we begin to decipher them and use that knowledge to inform and then potentially improve habitat work? Well, informed habitat work fits the natural landscape puzzle as best as possible while meeting your goals. Sometimes it's going to tell you that your goals are unrealistic or potentially harmful. So if you have a backyard or a forest unit or something that historically wants to be a grassland, you're not going to be able to turn it into a mesic bottomland forest, and it's not going to be a good idea try to. You're going to run into all kinds of issues. Things are where they are on the landscape for a reason, and working with that makes things easier on us from a management standpoint. It's going to save you money, time, energy, and it is more sustainable and ecologically sound. So it can make a really big difference. And like I said, these natural communities are pretty complex. So beginning to understand and break them down can help us make decisions around what we're doing in those spaces to inform our work. Now, that are heavily altered by humans can allow for some creative problem solving at times, and allow us unique opportunities to potentially work with natural communities, and try to have some specific conservation goals that we might not have elsewhere. And we'll have some examples of that later on. But remember to embrace ecology and natural community habitat features. There's a lot of things like snags, deadwood, and water and outcrops that sometimes get forgotten about or not recognized as much when you're doing kind of large scale stuff. And these are all important components that can shape the diversity and the kind of strength of the ecosystem or natural community that we're working with. So what does all of this look like in practice? So first thing I want to talk about is invasive species management. And when thinking about how we can use our knowledge of natural communities to shape our invasive species work, the matter of fact is that we need to manage non-native and invasive plants because they are not part of our natural communities. And they disrupt our natural communities and cause problems. So support what's already present, and if it's not broken, don't fix it. If you look at the photo in the kind of center of this slide to the right of the gentleman doing some work, there's a site of along the Chattahoochee River where a friend of mine who runs a cool restoration company has done some work, and he did a bunch of invasive species removal in this area. And and then soon after, he saw some results with this native Carolina dayflower and river oats. You can see the sweet gum in the foreground, so it's a bottomland. It's along the river where sweet gums should be growing. And all he did was remove the invasives, and this stuff was right there. So letting the seed bank express itself can be really beneficial. And sometimes, we think we want to do all these different things to help a natural community or help a site, when just managing invasives can have a huge impact. Now, thinking about promoting specialist and keystone species for optimal ecosystem function can be important. So thinking about what species have a larger impact on an ecosystem and prioritizing them, focusing on maybe invasive species management in areas where some of those keystone species maybe are at risk. Um, and when we're thinking about prioritizing what species to manage, I know especially here in the Metro Atlanta area, there's a ton of non-native plants and invasive species. And so you really got to think about where am I going to spend my time? And thinking about high-ranked invasive species on the Georgia Invasive Species Council list can be a good place to start. However, that list's not perfect. So you do also have to listen to your site. And specifically, there's one site that we work at where there's this plant called chaff flower. And that's the plant that's pictured on the bottom right hand of the screen. And it's unranked on the Georgia Invasive Species Council list. And so if I was just going off that, I wouldn't really be maybe considering the species. But this species is definitely a huge problem and is a growing concern. And I think it's going to be a problem for decades to come. And by going out and looking at that site, spending time documenting it and getting a feel for what was there, we recognize that that is a species that we need to manage. And you can see it has opposite leaves. It has these little spiky seed heads that are ripening this time of year. Will get stuck on dogs, and dogs will take them to other sites, or people when they're walking past trails. They have long tuberous roots that can be difficult to pull, and so we use a mix of manual removal and some herbicide management to deal with that species. But that's just, once again, thinking about site-specific problems, and also that different plants act differently across different communities and regions. So some plants that are problematic in Georgia might not be problematic in the Pacific Northwest. Some plants that might not be problematic in North Georgia might be really problematic in South Georgia. Um, and so, yeah, really thinking once again like a case by case basis, and using some of the resources that you have to start to identify priorities, and thinking about what natural community you have and how that affects how different species act. For example, you might have an area that used to be somewhat open and became more forested, and maybe it had some kudzu growing in it. And in a forest interior, kudzu is not necessarily a huge priority species, and I'd much rather spend time focusing on something like English ivy that can still thrive in in a forest. But that's not to say, just forget about the kudzu. Just kind of shape your priorities based on where you're working and how the plants behave and act in those systems. All right. So furthermore, there are many different methods of removing invasive species, and choosing the options that best align with and support those communities that you identify is really critical. And most of the times you're going to have some kind of combination of the different methods. There's a lot of different options you have: manual, mechanical, chemical, cultural, a lot of different ways you can go about managing invasives. In particular, I want to highlight chemical removal. It's really important, especially on the scale that we're doing a lot of our habitat work, and a lot of habitat managers across the region realize how important and valuable chemicals are, but obviously using them as appropriately and as best as possible is critical for protecting our ecosystem, getting them to places where we want them to be. So when you're thinking and looking at the site that you have, and once you identify the natural community that is there, you can kind of get a sense for, is this is this a very kind of disturbed natural community that has a lot of problems, faced a lot of habitat change and use over time, or is it something that is more maybe pristine and what we might think is better condition? And in places where you have something that is really intact, and maybe there's only two, invasive plant species that you're targeting, it's really critical to think about using spot spraying versus broadcast spraying when you're treating, especially foliar application of herbaceous plants, so that you can be as targeted as possible and really just get those non-native plants. At the same time, I think it's important to realize that there's times where you're going to have to you're going to have to kill some native plants to get the invasive plants. And in a healthy system, in the long run, that's going to be better than just saying, "Oh, I'm just going to go and be really careful and hand pull these or spot spray some of these." But if you miss some, that can really cause problems down the line. But obviously, it's all kind of project specific. But it's something to consider and reflect on when you're looking at what is the state, how healthy is this natural community, and how can I shape my invasive species management around that. So next thing to talk about is planting, and get the plants right as best as possible if needed. So I think it's really important to ask, do we need to plant or not plant? Is that an actual necessary thing for our goals, for our conservation goals, or whatever goals you have as a landowner? And you can think about the kind of site, and, is it a complete restoration? Is this something, where you're going from an old field or an old ag site or a golf course or an old industrial site or something that was, completely altered? Are you going, or is it a site that had an altered disturbance regime for a long time, and you need to get fire back on the landscape, or you need to do some thinning? Um, Thinking about the invasive species that are present. Sometimes you might want to consider planting after removing invasive species, because if you don't, there's more invasive species present. Um, Human factors, lack of connectivity is another big one. Some sites just aren't connected to areas where they can get an influx of natural regeneration, especially if it's a site that was really disturbed. And so those kinds of sites are probably more likely to need planting. And then thinking about the historic land use and how that affects what you see today. Is land really compacted? Um, and yeah, what does the seed bank potentially look like? Because once again, if you can just do the minimal amount of work and then let the seed bank express itself, then that's great. You don't want to overwork yourself. You want to work smart, not hard. And so yeah, it's really important to have those considerations. And when you are planting, using appropriate native plants, so appropriate meaning they're suitable, and they reflect the natural communities that are present in that area, and trying to strive for that as much as possible is going to be ideal. And then also thinking about local ecotype plants. So this means the plants are sourced from as near as possible to the site that you're working on. The closer, the better. And so you can do things like plant rescues or seed collection. Um, yeah, near you. Georgia Native Plant Society hosts tons of plant rescues, and down the bottom left, you can see we actually went to a plant rescue to add some diversity to one of our sites and experience what those are like, and that you know where you're getting your plants from, and yeah, that can be really really helpful. And then seed collection is really really valuable, where you can go out and you can specifically collect seeds, where you get permission to collect, in a responsible way, to further your restoration. And we have some projects where we do that, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. And then there's local native plant nurseries. There's a lot of really great ones around. We work closely with Georgia Native Plant Society, who has the Mountain Propagation Project. They've been huge partners. We actually collect some seed for them to grow, so it's, we know where that seed's coming from. Um, they're growing a lot of things that are local to a lot of our project sites. Um, and then there's also places like Beach Hollow, Wild Roots, Native Forest Nursery, and there's native plant sales at a lot of different organizations host them, like Trees Atlanta, Chattahoochee Nature Center. And there's a growing kind of movement for native plant materials in the state. There's a really exciting thing called the Georgia Native Seed Network that's growing. Zach Wood at the State Botanical Garden is rallying some troops and working on getting more native seeds available across the state. It's a growing movement that's really exciting and can hopefully be have a larger role in habitat restoration and habitat management moving forward. So those are some of the ways that you can get some native plants. The other thing is thinking about generalist or keystone species. Prioritizing that when you're coming up with maybe a species list can be really helpful in driving those natural communities. General species, keystone species like oak trees, can be really helpful, or things that are going to do well early on and kind of create a baseline and help you get a hold of the site that you're working with. And also considering specialists at time. So some of the special or rare species that define and are part of our natural communities, maybe you have a project where you could potentially help support plant conservation in that way. And so the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance is an amazing kind of consortium of organizations that help support plant conservation across the state, and they do an amazing job of organizing and connecting different folks that are working on specific plant conservation projects, and could be a great source to connect with when you're thinking of some specialist or rare species. And then diversity begets diversity. Adding diversity to the landscape is a really good thing, and it can help bolster and improve our habitat projects. But you have to remember to respect your natural communities. You don't want to just add diversity for diversity's sake. If you're potentially planting something that is not necessarily part of that natural community and could potentially impact that natural community in a negative way. And then also thinking about scale. The scale of your project site is important to consider as well, because the larger the site, maybe the more diversity, and looking at the natural communities that are already there, and saying, if it has already a bunch of different natural communities, then you can really go big on diversity. But maybe if it's a really unique specialized site, you don't need to go crazy. You want to go more species specific to that individual community. And yards are a particularly interesting site to be working on because a yard is not necessarily a natural community, but it is kind of embedded within a larger natural community. So looking to the larger natural community for inspiration. But being such a small scale, you can add some diversity, but I think it's still really important to consider what community you are already a part of, because obviously what you plant in your yard can affect the community around you and the ecosystems around you. And so that's just something to think about. So most people probably already realize, but native plants are critical to this. Yeah, supporting them because they co-evolved with all of the plants and animals that are in these natural communities. The phenology, when things are blooming, are aligning with when pollinators need them. Plants are bearing fruit as birds are migrating. Just in the next couple months here, the Virginia creeper, the poison ivy, the devil's walking stick, the spice bush are all going to be ripening as millions of birds are coming and flying south, and they need those resources. And so native plants are really critical for this work. Birds Georgia has some resources highlighting um, native plant resources in Georgia. If you go to our website on our wildlife sanctuary page, we have a resources tab that has a story map that Heather put together that's really great and outlines a variety of native plant species matched with birds and different native plant resources in the state. And then the gentleman up there is Doug Tallamy. He's kind of a legend in the native plant world and helps people understand that valuable coevolution between plants and insects and why they're so important. And so he has a variety of books out that are really great to look into. So another thing I want to highlight and talk about is disturbance. Disturbance is important. We mentioned it earlier, thinking about fire, wind, and water on the landscape. And disturbance regimes that mimic those of natural communities, when possible, are going to be optimal for projects, especially in long-term management. So prescribed fire, for example, obviously we live in a different time where wildfires can't really do what they do historically. And so prescribed fire is really important for managing and improving our habitats. So thinking about the frequency, the time of year, those things like how did that look historically? Can we emulate that? Thinking about natural breaks. So if you're putting in a fire break, can you use a stream or a pond or a lake or a beaver wetland? Historically, they would be burning to that and not necessarily to the trail right before that. So trying to use natural breaks can be really beneficial in creating a more complete ecosystem, and a natural community that kind of flows in completion as it would historically. And then power diversity enkindles biodiversity, right? Burner Bob says it all the time. And so that's to recognize, having prescribed fire on a variety of the communities that historically would have it across the state is really valuable, but also the types of fires that we have. Burning a site at different times obviously can have different management implications. And thinking about when a site would burn historically, like I said, is really valuable in long-term management. With some projects, you might need to burn more frequently earlier on for invasive plant management reasons or for site prep if you have to do planting. But thinking about what it would look like historically is really valuable. And fire is an incredible tool, a natural phenomenon on the landscape that it's highly beneficial, it's cost effective, it's one of the best things that we can do for our communities and our habitats. And um, yeah, it does a variety of things. Another disturbance that we have now living in the human world is mowing, and mowing can be a great thing when you're not able to use fire, right? It can mimic fire. It can mimic maybe bison potentially on the landscape, large herbivores that might have played a role in some of our natural communities historically. And so it can be used in a variety of ways to try to mimic what we would see in the landscape. Another thing to think about is thirds for birds. Um, not mowing everything at once every year, mowing differently. Once again, biodiversity enkindles biodiversity, mowing diversity enkindles biodiversity. The more diversity of habitat management we can have on a site can really help impact our biodiversity and some of our goals. And then also timber harvesting, something I'm not as familiar with. We don't do much timber harvesting at Burge, Georgia, but it kind of replicates a storm. Same thing with thinning. Can be really valuable and for meeting a variety of goals and trying to match maybe the historic natural community that was present, especially if you don't have disturbance on the landscape in the same way that you did in the past. Um, and I'll say Bob Cooper gave a presentation as part of the series before me, and it's on our YouTube page, and he talks about timber harvesting in more depth, and it's really helpful if you want to listen to that. So having a long-term vision is critical. We don't own land, we partner with people who manage land, and we want them to have that same long-term vision as us. Because yeah, these natural communities were shaped very, very long time. And so thinking long term is critical. Management plans are really important and can be a helpful tool. They're required for some cost share programs that are really helpful for private landowners and various folks to get support with habitat goals. And they're helpful to communicate site needs and routine work. So if you are working with a crew of people, volunteers, the community, it can help you kind of communicate that, or with like a consulting forester, having that plan can be really beneficial. And then also monitoring. Monitoring is critical, and this ties into some of the curiosity, documentation, and research I talked about earlier. If you continue some of those practices throughout your projects or as part of how you're managing your land, you can have a more informed kind of decision, kind of process over time. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to do this. Don't forget about partnership. So Birds, Georgia, we can't do it all. We're doing a bunch of stuff, and at one of our sites in particular, Deep Dean Park in Atlanta, we are trying to partner with a local university to get students to come out to do plant plots to help inform some of the work that we're doing. If you're working with, community, you could get a community to do a community bio blitz. You could, if you're working with a larger agency, maybe they have a different branch, like an education branch, that can come out and do programming. So you can get creative with how you're doing monitoring, and there's a lot of options because it can be really tough at times to find the time to do that. Now I wanted to get into some examples of some of our habitat work and how we are thinking about the natural communities that are around these sites and how that informs some of our work. And so we're going to go to the South River watershed that comes out of Atlanta and goes down and flows to the Ocmulgee and out to the Altamaha and the Atlantic. And specifically, there's a bunch of really cool natural communities in this area that we work with in the Metro Atlanta area. We have grasslands, outcrops, wetlands, all sorts of woodlands. And so we do a lot of work in the Arabia National Heritage Area. We partner with the Arabia Alliance, DeKalb County parks as well at the Arabia Mountain Nature Preserve. And we have three main sites. Sorry. Here we go. We have three main sites. Panola Mountain State Park, Lion Farm, and Wilburn Farm is where we've done a lot of work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our Wilburn Farm site. So this is a pretty cool site that's at the Arabia Mountain Nature Preserve. And so when we're going and identifying this as a project site, once again, we are prioritizing grasslands. So I went out there, looked around, heard the indigo bunting singing, asked if I needed sunscreen, and it said, heck yeah, there's a lot of sun, there's a lot of grass. So this is definitely a grassland. And then, looking to the surrounding area and looking at the grassland itself and what was the plant community and how did that define kind of our goals in terms of what our work needed to be. And there was a lot of old pasture grasses. So this area used to be a pasture a while ago, as you know, it has farm in the name, so you can kind of assume there was a big human presence at one time. Um, but the site actually had a lot of really good native species as well. And on the edges, we're seeing things like Georgia oak, there's yucca, there's more xeric loving species, there's blueberries, there's um, a variety of things that kind of tell us that, yeah, this was a grassland and is kind of surrounded by woodlands. And there's also a small rock outcrop component with some cool plants. And so, yeah, we're looking at it and we saw, there's these non-native grasses, but there's also a lot of good stuff. So this probably has not been managed as a pasture for quite some time because in the middle photo, you can see that reddish tinge to the grass is Tridens flava. It's the purple top grass, and it's, all through there. And there's split beard blue stem. There's purple love grass. There's a beak panic grass. There's little blue stem. There's tons of broom sedge. So there's a lot of good already there. And recognizing that, we're like, okay, we don't need to be as heavy with our effort here in certain ways, and we need to be a little bit more calculated. And so our goal, one of our big goals, is to remove the non-native turf grasses, the non-native pasture grasses that are inhibiting some of those other native forbs from filling in and decreasing the total abundance of native warm season grasses. And so doing herbicide applications specifically targeting those grasses is a really good approach. But the other thing is, like, do we need to plant or do we not need to plant? Well, because there are these non-native turf grasses, they've kind of diminished the overall forb diversity over time. And so we do want to plant native plants, but we're going to work with Georgia Native Plant Society to get local ecotype plants as much as possible. And we also collected a bunch of seed on site. Like I said, there's a bunch of native grasses already out there. And so we're able to collect some of that seed. And then as we do herbicide applications and find patches that are more open and bare, we can apply some of the seed directly from the site right back to the site, and have a large impact in that way. So we're in the process of that currently. And if you want to come out to a volunteer day work with us, we would welcome you. We'll probably be doing some planting this fall. The next site on our journey is Panola Mountain State Park. And at Panola Mountain, we kind of are complementing some work that Georgia DNR is doing. In particular, this site used to be a golf course. And so this one, unlike the Wilburn Farm site, has a much more depleted plant community. And we're trying to yeah, restore grassland there. And so with this one, we've been working on it for a longer time. We've been doing a lot more, adding much more plant material than we would otherwise. Hundreds of pounds of native broom sedge seed to replace a lot of the non-native turf grasses that we've been treating. And then also applying fire on the landscape to reinstate that disturbance regime. That also helps us with some particular herbicide management. Um, and yeah, we planted a ton of different plants thanks to all the volunteers that have come out and worked on that site. And cool thing about this site is there's some bird banding that has been happening with DNR. Charlie Muse has been contracted at Panola Mountain Banding Station, and he's led that station for a while and done a ton of great work and tons of grassland birds. And so we can ask those birds if we need sunscreen, and they'll say yeah, because we're in a grassland. And yeah, really cool to have this kind of active monitoring going on, and kind of strengthens the outreach and the ability to tell the story of the impact of the work that we're doing at that site. So that's something that we definitely prioritize. Um, Another site I want to talk about is Cochrane Shoals, and this is along the Chattahoochee River. We work with the Chattahoochee National Park Conservancy and the National Park Service. And this site historically is a really popular birding spot. And here you can see on the map, it's right along the Chattahoochee River. Most spots along rivers, especially in the metro area, were developed for agriculture a long time ago. So that's definitely what we see here. But looking at historic aerial photos, also see that this area was used as a community recreation area for a while. So there were a lot of non-native turf grasses after it was used for agriculture. And today it has seceded into more of a wood riparian forest, and there's still some grass component, and then there's also a beaver wetland. And so it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what this was before agriculture, but certainly the amount of beavers that are trying to shape the landscape make you think that this could have been a beaver meadow, especially considering the abundance of documented rare sparrow species in the winter using the site. And so we've been working with them to try to emulate kind of quasi beaver meadow. You know, the hydrology of the site has been changed and shifted quite a bit, so there are limitations there. But recognizing that and thinking about that has really allowed us to um, shape that project. And this one, here's an example of our iNaturalist project. We did a BioBlitz out there. There's been almost 1,500 observations, so we can use those observations to inform and reflect on some of the work that we're doing at that site. So there's a lot of woody removal. We are the beavers when the beavers can't do what they want to do. And a lot of native planting. And I don't know if I have time to get into this one too much, but we also have done work on Jekyll Island on a site that was greatly altered, and we kind of looked to surrounding natural communities for inspiration, in particular Little St. Simon's Island, and have been emulating their Muley Meadows, rare maritime grassland ecosystem, with the help of Jekyll Island Authority and some partners at DNR and the Coastal Plains Georgia Native Plant Society. And so, yeah, thanks to all the volunteers that have helped with that project. Um, uh, and I'll briefly mention, you can do a lot in your own backyard. Uh, Shout out to our wildlife sanctuary program. It's a program that helps you realize what you can do and thinking about the natural communities around you. We have one landowner, Richard Hall, who has an amazing backyard in Athens. He's documented over 150 bird species by emulating kind of two particular habitat types, more of a grassland in his front yard and a woodland in his backyard. And he's had some incredible species and observations. And I created two videos about his property. One's on our Birds Georgia YouTube page, and one's on my personal Nature with Gabe page. You can check them out if you want to learn more about that. But I'll just go through some resources and learning, and then if we have any time for questions, I will go from there. Um, so, yes, let me advance the slide. Okay, so wherever you are, you can have an impact. Whether you have a big property or small property, starting a list or several, in either having an eBird account if you're a birder, and documenting the birds. iNaturalist, like I said, is really great. You can document all kinds of life. That can be really helpful. If you're not familiar with birds and want to get more into birds, the Merlin Bird ID app is really great. And a great resource to help you get started. Um, and then there's all kinds of community science programs you can get involved with. Connecting with organizations and going to their events can be really helpful. I mentioned the sanctuary certification that we have for small properties. We have a larger habitat stewardship program that is geared towards sites that are 10 acres or larger. And there's other organizations that have certification programs. And then lastly, there's tons of great resources for starting to learn plants. If you have some green blindness and want to grow and learn plants and help you define further what grassland am I in, what forest or woodland am I in. Weekly's Flora of the Southeastern US and FloraQuest, the app that's there in the bottom left, is a really great resource. Georgia Native Plant Society, the Georgia Botanical Society, the Bot Gardens, Coastal Wildscapes. we're having Fall Flyway Festival in September to celebrate native plants and birds. We have a huge event at Chattahoochee Nature Center called the Round Robin, where Dwayne Estes from the Southeastern Grassland Institute is coming to give a keynote speech, and we're going to have bird walks and breakout sessions and all kinds of stuff. And there's lots of other organizations that specialize in habitat management that are great to connect with. And in a variety of other options. But lastly, just go outside, connect to the lands near you, visit public lands in your ecoregion or near you for inspiration to help you understand natural communities that are around you. Um, and yeah, go out and ask the birds if you need sunscreen and have a good time. I think Heather lost connection. Oh, Heather's back. There you are.
I am back. I dropped out for a few minutes and I'm really glad it didn't end it for everybody. I was worried that might happen, so.
Yeah. Well, I think I got through everything. I don't know if we have time for questions, but
We are
um,
over, but it doesn't look like people are signing off. So if you want to stay on, just I know we have two in the Q&A right now. We can just take just a couple of brief minutes if that's all right with you, Gabe.
yes, that's all right with me.
Awesome. Okay, we have one question. How do you feel about thinning and limiting species that come from the seed bank to allow for greater diversity, like not letting everything be dog fennel, Canada goldenrod, or blue stem grass? Or do you just let it be what it wants to be? Is there a meadow where mowing was stopped? This is a meadow where mowing was stopped.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's quite nuanced. So, I think if you think about the historic natural communities that those plants were a part of, they did not play as big of a role as they are in probably what you're seeing, and that's likely due to um, changes to the habitat over time, disturbance that have maybe removed some of the diversity and allowed those plants that are really active robust species that are early successional to really thrive. And so I think in some cases you definitely are going to want to manage those species. For a lot of our grassland work, we are managing dog fennel and tall goldenrod and a variety of native early successional species. Once a site is in a place where you can do that and you're not going to be just letting non-native invasive plants go bananas. Um, so those plants do have a role. They are part of natural succession, but in a lot of yeah, sites that have been disturbed greatly, you should probably consider managing them to a certain extent.
Awesome, thank you. And then what is the best resource to identify grasses? In my experience, iNaturalist is not really strong to ID them. And you might have addressed this in one of your last slides when you went over some helpful resources.
Yes. Yeah, grasses are really, really tough. I know the State Botanical Garden has a course on native plants that is really fantastic, and they specifically have a graminoid class where some of the leading graminoid botanists and experts in the state will teach and connect you. So if you're able to do that, that's a really good option. Um, uh, when doing iNaturalist, because iNaturalist can be helpful for grasses, but can be tough. Grasses can be hard to photograph. So if you take a white piece of paper with you and photograph the inflorescence of the grass when it's going to seed or when it's flowering, and have that white paper behind it so you can really clearly see what that plant is, that'll give you better chance of identifying the grass via iNaturalist or any other plant apps. And then also, um, namethatplant.net is good. Um, and just getting out in the field and connecting with folks that are doing this work, coming to Birds Georgia events, coming to events with the Georgia Botanical Society, a lot of really, really knowledgeable plant folks out there. So grasses are definitely tough. But just going out and looking at them, even if you don't know what they are, when you do figure out what they are, you're already going to have so much knowledge and understanding by making those observations and being active with that.
Thank you. Somebody said I'm not comfortable selecting and applying herbicides, especially to my mixed grass fields, because the native and not native grasses are so interspersed. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, if you're able to, seek some like consultation from, some biologist, like Quail Forever, NRCS, Georgia DNR often have free consultations that might be able to help give you some guidance. Or if you're able to contract a local forester or habitat manager to come out and either do that work for you or give you some advice. But definitely, I think it's something that's can be difficult for folks to sometimes grasp, but it is critical for this work is realizing we can't be perfect and we have to think on larger scales. So you are going to be, probably killing some plants that are native, but in the long run, that's going to yield more native plants when you are managing those non-native plants. Using selective herbicides, getting to understand which ones are going to be best for certain situations can be really helpful. So yeah, I'd say trying to connect with local experts and biologists and resources, and going from there.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I think with that we will call it good. I really appreciate you presenting to us, Gabe. That was really, really helpful. And if anybody mulls this over and has dreams tonight about habitat restoration, feel free to email Gabe in the morning if you have any specific questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Heather. This was a blast. Everybody have a good night. Get
Thanks
outside.
all. Have a good one.